Why are you doing this? What do you hope it accomplishes? How will you measure success? And not just in dollars and cents and a timetable, but if you understand what the project was about, what we're trying to achieve.
Welcome to the Disgruntled PM Podcast, your weekly therapy session for the chaotic world of project management, transforming daily frustrations into real action. Welcome, everybody. I'm Trevor, the Disgruntled PM, and with me today is my guest, Ed Bacco. Now, Ed, I call him the most interesting man I've ever met because he has quite the background and quite the life he's lived. So, Ed, do you want to tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
That's a bad start.
Fine.
It's off now. Well, thanks, Trevor. It's interesting. You call me the most interesting man I ever met. My gastroenterologist just said the same thing to me, which is kind of a funny conversation. Somebody looking from that, but what you're referring to is that I've been blessed with being able to do a lot of different things in my life, from a military career like yourself, that led me all over the world, diving, scuba diving, all over the world. Interesting jobs, from close-in protection all the way through and being the corporate security director for Amazon, Homeland Security as the National Command Center director, and then where we met in an innovation lab where we were playing with robotics, drones, and AI. So it's like I can't keep a job, but it's very interesting, and it's given me I've been very lucky and fortunate to meet people like yourself.
Well, you seem to have left off a few things off that biography there.
There's a
From
few things there.
what I remember, and this is only parts of your life that I know of, is you ran some dive shops in the Caribbean. You took a year off to chase the Grateful Dead, and if I'm remembering right from one of our conversations, you became a plumber's apprentice for a year because you were bored and curious.
That's all true. So I did follow. I got out of the military after 4 years, had all my cash, and saved up to go to college. A friend asked me if I knew who the Grateful Dead were. I did not know at that time. I did by the end of that year. I had saw them 48 times that year, all over the country. It was a fascinating year, but then I spent my college money that year and begged the Navy to take me back. Then after my Navy career, I did end up down in the Virgin Islands. Had a dive store down there until 9/11 hit, and then it pulled me back into the world of security, in which I started and actually finished my career.
All right, so let's get started. You've been an executive for a long time, and one of the things that I was really excited to have you on for is to talk to the audience about the executive's perspective of projects, because as PMs, we're so busy with our own stuff, we realize that the good idea fairy comes to us in the form of stakeholders, but nobody ever bothers to play the little game of let's see what's going on that side of the fence, because I know there's a lot of politics involved. I know there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes that the PMs don't see.
Totally understand that. It's interesting, Trevor, because I've been on both sides of the spectrum, which is unusual. Usually, either you're corporate security and you hire a company to do your work and your PMs, or you're on the contractor side where you're actually doing those projects for executives like myself. I actually did both, which gave me a unique view of the world, and particularly in this case, the security world. And I was actually quite shocked when I went from Amazon over to a contractor company called Aronson Security Group, when I went to the commercial side of the business, on how disconnected not only the project managers were, but most of the organization was around it. The technicians that installed things, the designers who built things, and act all the way to the PMs. And when I disconnected, I mean, they had no idea why they were doing what they were doing, other than they got to check off the block, meaning they didn't understand the importance of the work they were doing. They didn't important, in our world was security world, and it's the same for any project on any side. You got to understand why a company, in this case like Amazon or in the military, why they're spending that money. Why is it important to them to do this project, whatever this project was? And in this case, for us, was for the protection of life and property. And they played a very big role in protecting those organizations. But when on the commercial side, there was a major disconnect. The PMs generally didn't take the time to truly understand the value of what they were delivering. It wasn't just having a project completed on time, on budget. It was, did you truly understand the importance of that job? And so there's a big disconnect, to your point, between the executives who signed all the paperwork to do the project and the people who do the project. And I think that's one of the learning things that, that when I see good PMs like yourself, you spend a great deal of time interviewing the people that the project was for. Why are you doing this? What do you hope it accomplishes? How will you measure success? And not just in dollars and cents in a timetable. But if you understand what the project was about, what we're trying to achieve, and in this case for security example, with the protection of life and property, it means that if we did it right, we either deterred crime, prevented crime, or identified crime. And so that, the PMs, that should be their success, not just the dollars and cents.
So with that being said, you've seen a lot of projects presented to you. Most, I'll say most notably for me, my flagship project in my career. What would you say the most common mistake that you see when projects are presented to you as an executive, a sponsor, a stakeholder, the person with the checkbook to be able to tell someone, yes, let's go do that?
Well, again, I think that one of the things is I ask them, why are we doing this? It's interesting, Trevor, that on the commercial side of it, we don't ask the question often enough about, why are we building this? What does this mean? What am I hoping to accomplish? So it was interesting. When I was at Amazon, salespeople would come to me all the time, and they said they had the absolute solution to the problem that I was experiencing. And so I'd say, that sounds fantastic. What is my problem? What am I having? What's wrong? Please tell me, because we're always looking for great ideas. Tell me what the problem is. And so that means you really understand what I'm trying to achieve when I'm spending, in this case, the money of the shareholders of Amazon. And so it's great that you understand it, but most of the time they have no idea, right? It's just a thing they sell. And so the mistake that PMs, and it's not just PMs, I encourage everybody across the full spectrum, because it's not one person. It's a team of people. And in this case, it's led by a PM. A project manager manages the project, but they manage the project from two different perspectives if they're going to be successful. One for the company they're working for, but more importantly, the one that's paying the bill. And so what I find is when I first meet PMs, and I was lucky because I ran big projects for Amazon when we first moved out of one building to transforming downtown Seattle. And we had projects, over 190 projects when I left around the world going at one time. And so, but what we always look for is companies that understood us. What is the issue we're having? Please explain that back to me. So the mistake, your question is, what's the first mistake? Is that they start with what their outcome is and not what I'm looking for. Always start with the customer. Why are you building? Why are you spending the money on this project? What do you hope it to accomplish? And how do you, Mr. Customer, how do you define success?
So with that, let's kind of take that apart a little bit, because one of the things you and I have had conversations about is who identifying the real customer, as in who is, for a project, you're going to have a PM come into you usually with, like you said, those ideas of, hey, we got this problem solved for you. And you say, okay, well, tell me about it. What is it? And then let's hypothetically say, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's go. How do you identify as the PM who the real customer is, because it's usually not the person signing your check.
It's a great question, and it's a hard thing to determine because for me, my previous roles, I was rare. I had my own internal project managers that were, they would coordinate with the people that are on the commercial side who are doing the work. So because we had 190 some projects, I can't be in 190 places at once. So we had an individual representative of our side at each one of those locations and running those projects. So to your point, that's not the person who was signing the check anyways, but that's not even the person who the work is being done for. It's just their job to coordinate it on the customer side of the house. This is why you have to push that person for answers. You have to say, well, what division is this for? What are you trying to accomplish from this? And it might be that you find out that um, your mirror PM on the customer side doesn't really know. But you should ask. You should try to figure out, is this, why, what are you trying to accomplish with this spend of money and resources?
Yeah, because when you think about it, as any project, there's a spend, and then there's usually two companies involved unless it's internal, and then you've got an internal customer, but no matter what, the person that is taking delivery of the item is typically not the customer. They're the end user.
Yeah, absolutely. So what you have to do then is figure out learn about the company itself. There's different ways that, if it's a commercial, it's excuse me, a listed company that is publicly traded, there's a lot of information about that company out there, right? And so you can actually pull their SEC report every year and read their 10K report, and it lists in there the different projects and why are they doing it. But at least understand the nature of the business or the nature of the mission for your customers,
So,
and be able to understand that.
so with that being said, I want to keep pulling on this whole idea of identifying your customers, because as PMs, I always say we see part of the world, and that's our world, but we don't see the bigger picture of the umbrella above us, the portfolio of projects. Usually there's 20, you as an executive are managing hundreds of projects at one time. What I view as, hey, the world is on fire for me, you're looking at going, no, it's not.
Yeah.
So when you're kicking off a project like that on the executive side, I know you kicked off, or you spearheaded Amazon's global operations. What was your process for identifying who the real customers were and how they would be impacted versus just the PMs running the show?
Yeah, so that's on my side of the equation. On the customer side of the equation, a lot like I was the director of security, but I didn't own the responsibility for security. It was not my responsibility. Most security directors will say it's their responsibility. They accept that, but that's because my type of business attracts Type A personalities like yourself and myself. But in this case, it does the injustice to the company if we say that, because it goes back to another senior executive that really owns the responsibility. The middle managers don't own the responsibility, the true responsibility. For like an example, to provide a safe and healthy work environment, free from any violence and things like that, you would think it's the security department's responsibility. And it is their responsibility to execute on that mission, but it's owned typically by the HR director. So you got to map back who is the executive in charge of who owns the final responsibility. At fulfillment centers, in our case, right, we had people that we had two issues there. So there might be multiple owners at a very, very senior level of organization. In the case of a distribution center at Amazon, well, you have to, protect the workforce, make sure you have a safe work environment, number one. That goes back to HR. You'd also have to make sure that the money and time isn't wasted, right? So you're not just going to install something that makes it less efficient. So that probably goes back to the operationals SVP. And then there's the financial impact to it that goes back to the chief financial officers of the organization. So that's where I'm saying you got to really understand who owns this project. And a lot of times it's hard to find that information out from your partner on the other side of the table. If you're the contractor looking across the table at the end users, they might not know that themselves. Uh, but this is where, a good seasoned PM will start pulling that apart. Because then if you know that when you're finished with your project, Trevor, you help the chief human relations officer, you help the chief financial officer achieve their mission. It's going to be a hugely successful project. And by the way, that company is going to get used again.
Using those 5 whys is probably the best strategy to start with, because then as you're asking your stakeholders, why are we doing this? Yes, I know why I'm doing the project as the PM, but I don't know why we're doing this from the greater picture of everything else that's going on outside of my blinders of the universe, so to speak.
So when we're doing like defect management, or we had an incident, we use the 5 whys to figure out why something went wrong. The hardest one is the last one, right? And so that because you keep asking, you keep digging another layer, another layer, another layer. And let's just say you never really solve it. You never get to the 5th why or the 4th why. But I guarantee you, you're 3 more whys deeper into an organization than a lot of your counterparts are. And that makes you a better PM, and you'll deliver a better project.
And if nothing else, you're getting to some of those stakeholders who might be the silent majority, so to speak, of the project, who just don't want to deal with it, don't have the time, don't have the energy, don't have the bandwidth. Like you said, you had a representative for all of your different divisions. You weren't personally dealing with those PMs, were you?
Likely, unless it was a major, major project. And that'd be something like we're constructing a tower or something. But
And last thing on Amazon, I want to ask, just because I know this answer, but I know the audience doesn't. Did you hang out with Jeff?
did I hang out? I knew Jeff when he only had $40 billion. So I had met Jeff a number of times. I briefed him once in my whole time there. So it was an intense, intense run up to that meeting.
So you knew him when he was poor, almost homeless, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just he had an old car, but he just bought his big house, but he only had 40 billion.
Well, we're talking about Jeff Bezos, not Warren Buffett.
Yeah, that's right.
So when you went from, you spent a long career working in the government, both in the military and for the private side of the government, where things are really regulated, regimented, very structured, very formal hierarchy and organizational structure. What was it like when you went to Amazon, where, for lack of a better term, it's controlled chaos, or uncontrolled chaos even?
Well, I would actually, it's probably the other way around. Um, it was a surprising thing, right? Coming out of the military, as you well know, you had manuals about manuals. Everything is very dictated there. And it was interesting because a good example of a project that was done in the military that I led when I was in Sicily, where we had a joint base with the Italian Air Force, and then there was a naval air station there. And so we ran a project where we wanted to secure the perimeter. So we put a fence all the way around our section. The Italians were going to do their section. And then ours had sensors in it. We used FLIR sensors, and we had put one of the first access control systems in at the time to control access to the field. It was a 12-door system that cost $2.5 million, something that cost $150,000 now. But it was the very first time. But it was interesting because we just marched ahead and did it. Because that was our mission. Let's go tackle this mission. We got this. I was a chief at the time. Okay, chief, let's do this thing. We got the fence up. And lo and behold, the Italians never put their section of the fence up. So there's this horseshoe that was open at one end that never got protected because we just went about it blindly and got the mission accomplished. That stuff would have never happened at Amazon, right? And so Amazon, they challenge you one of the things is think big and be right a lot. There's 14 core leadership principles by which every Amazonian at all levels is judged on and measured against every year for the performance. And this is one of those things, if you do something that stupid at Amazon, then you're not going to be there. They want you to challenge them. They want you to challenge the logic of that. And so this required much more thinking than in the military. So it wasn't, chaos, because it really defined the projects. And today the projects are extremely defined, but they still look for people to challenge them on that. So it wasn't controlled chaos. It was innovation at its best.
And I think a lot of people can confuse innovation with chaos.
Yeah, and a lot of PMs especially don't do well with that. They don't do well with that because they don't want to, it's like either maybe they're uncomfortable challenging something, but or maybe they just want that, their job is they go to work every day and we got to have those people too, and they check the block. I got to do X. They did X. Even though they can look beyond that and see. That just doesn't make any sense. I was doing work in China as an example. And so I went we were buying a company in China that was a distribution center. And so when I went into the distribution center, the Chinese security guards there made me go through a metal detector. And everybody had to go through the metal detector except for pregnant women. And pregnant women didn't have to go through the metal detector. They still don't today. But what was totally absurd about this was it wasn't plugged in. It had broke years before. But nobody challenged that this doesn't work. They were told that everybody has to go through the metal detector. But I quite clearly could see the plug was hanging out, wasn't working, hadn't been working for years. But that's the kind of you shouldn't be flying blind like that. You should be challenging logic. And from a customer's perspective, when that's done right, it's value added, right? Because they can't think of everything. They want a partner who really wants to understand what they're trying to accomplish, will push back appropriately. And, that was part of our core and part of our, core tenets when we were working together is that, you had to push back. It's expected to.
I think I pushed back a lot on you and probably irritated you quite a bit.
Well, no, you definitely challenged me, and I enjoy that. It's one of those things that, we had all the AI engineers and everybody else, and I appreciate that. That's value added to me because it makes me have to think a little bit more. I never took it personal. I wasn't challenged because you can't do it in such a way you're going to make somebody else feel bad about you pushing back. It was always done right, and you always did it well. Have you ever thought about doing it this way? That's a classic Trevor. So
Well, and that kind of goes back to something I posted about on LinkedIn about feedback, and sometimes context becomes more important than content because, if we had a very good relationship, but if I came up to you and I said, "Hey, Ed, this is dumb." The next words out, anything I said after that, you weren't listening to.
yeah, you can't just say that, right? You have to say that you have a better idea. And so sometimes the PMs do their job and they do it well. And a good example of doing it well and not taking it to the next level and pushing back on the design was an early data center we built. And it was we hired a company to secure the facility for us. They were the experts on electronic and physical security. We knew what we wanted to accomplish. They knew how to execute it. And so they did, and so it worked fine until the system locked us out, and we had to cut a hole through the roof to get in of our own facility. And when we brought the company back out, they said they admitted that, hey, we saw this, but it wasn't in our project. And the simple solution was to add one door that would be key operated. It might set off an alarm. It would set off an alarm if a key was operated, but you can get into the building. And it was one of those things they didn't want to push back on. And so they lost all the future work because they just weren't a good partner. I mean, like, how could you let us do this?
So on a situation like that, as the executive, or we'll say at this point the customer, how could have been avoided with a variety of remedies, but where would you view the onus of responsibility for bringing it? Is that something that you would have expected them to bring up to you as the customer, or is that something that you would look at and say, why didn't we think of this when we were designing the system?
It's both. You can't actually hold the contractor responsible for executing 100% on their contract. So if they did the job as we asked for it to be done, then great. But that's what we learned. Okay, you're not the kind of partner we're looking for future work. Because if that's all you're going to do, because we all have experience where we either at restaurants or in service stations or wherever we might be, we could see the person just going through the motions on
Hmm.
whatever it is we've hired, and they're just going through the motions. They're not engaged at all. They almost seem bored with having to deal with you, and it leaves a very bad taste in your mouth, and you don't go back. And so this is sort of the same case, but it's a much larger scale. So if that's the kind of partner, it was a mistake for us to hire that company. And from my perspective, we never hired them again. Because we do, even though they executed on it, their fault was saying we saw it and didn't bring it up. It'd be another thing if said, hey, we didn't think of it either. But they
Hmm.
were quite clear that we saw this thing, and it's like that's the worst case. As you well know, I hold everybody on our teams responsible, and I'm held responsible to them that if I disagree with you, I I owe it to you to tell you why I disagree and what my thought is. I can't just say, I don't like that. To your point, I could say, I think that's wrong. Here's another way of looking at that. And then if the person says, I think that you should have had a key operated door, and I'm like, well, that would make sense. If I said no, then it's on me.
And odds are, if they had brought that up to you with the change request with an exorbitant amount of money for that change request, you probably would have paid it just because you didn't think of it. It's something that needed to be done, and they were already getting all the work done. Correct?
Absolutely. I mean, it's on us because we were because it affected other designs too. It was that we were doing rinse and repeat on building out data centers, and these weren't big ones like they are today, but still, you'll see a lot of that design is the exact same that we learned through that process. But no matter what project it is, you know, you as the PM should probably be around a group of people you're overseeing that have been doing this, that are well experienced. This probably isn't their first rodeo. And the part of the PMs is if you see something, a better way of doing it, either on our behalf or on the customer's behalf, please bring it up. Oh, have that dialogue. I have seen PMs that were just, we're going to stick to the schedule, we're not going to talk, just go do your job. And that's not the way of doing it. You do have to get them excited about their work as they're in a career, but they need to be able to know they can push back on you in a respectful way.
And that kind of goes to the idea of something you always told me, which is innovation is hard.
Yeah,
Thinking about that that example of that data center, if you had been building them forever and that was the plan and that worked and everything works until it doesn't, how much did it cost you to cut the hole in the ceiling, repair the hole and everything else as a lesson learned versus you would have paid probably twice that just to put that door in keyed as a change request so you didn't have to cut the hole and repair it.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, we would have looked at it, that had been much cheaper, right? Because we had to hire a crane, and there was all sorts of permits to cut through the roof. We actually voided the membrane on the roof itself, so then if it ever leaked again, it was on us. So it was a very expensive learning item, but it was such a simple thing. Just think about it. Adding a deadbolt on the door would have solved that.
And and the worst part had to have been, oh, we saw that, we just chose to ignore it.
And that's the most disappointing thing, because we went through a lot of work on trying to select our vendors, and we didn't always select the cheapest one. We tried to find one that would do the best job for us. Sometimes that was like that. You want to partner with us, and we really want to be a partner. We're on the same team, and then when you find out that we really weren't on the same team, then that is disappointing to us. And it's a lesson that I took when I went to the commercial side, right? And so our team, we originally started out as a consultancy, that putting all the plans together on behalf of our customers. They would tell us what we want, and we would go back and put that on paper, but we always had suggestions on here's some other ways you could save money. This is how you can actually do a little bit better job. And if they didn't like it, they didn't like it. But we felt it was our duty as being part of and our responsibility since we were on their team.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into the concept of risk and timelines and communication. And how has your approach to all these things been to lead you to success? Because it seems like, I don't want to say success follows you, because you're a very capable person who's done a lot in your life, but how have you managed those types of things with the projects you've worked on to be successful?
Well, risk comes in a lot of different forms. You do have to try to avoid risk or the outcome, and not avoid risk, to minimize risk or to mitigate risk is what you want to try to do. And so you have to think about, that you either accept risks, mitigate risks, or eliminate it. And in this case, we don't want to try to accept risk. We want to try to eliminate it or minimize it to start out with, which means we got to bring a lot of voices to the table. And that's a partnership for the PMs too, right? Because too often, I think that we just drop a lot of companies just drop a package on a PM's lap, said, go do this. And then the PM's going to fail because the timeline or the budget or something is just not realistic. And so this is where we want to try to minimize it or eliminate that. We want to bring those people to the table to start out with. From a PM's perspective, they should be pushing for that voice. Let me help you design your expectations and the timeline stuff. And in the end, I mean, this is where we get to that if you can't eliminate it or minimize the impact of that risk, then somebody has to accept it. But to accept a risk is to have to note that the risk exists in the first place. And that's the tough part, because this is where this conversation started. Like, who owns the risk? Right, and that's that person. If you might not be the person sitting across from the table from you at the first meetings. It might not be that person. Probably does not own the risk. And so if that person say, "Well, we're going to accept the risk," that's not the right owner of it. Only the true owner of the risk can accept it, and that's why the PM on the contractor side really has to try to figure out who owns that risk, and at least say it out loud that it's like this risk belongs to the HR director. You're speaking behalf of the HR director because we want to memorialize that you accepted this risk.
What happens if the person that's ultimately responsible for that risk doesn't accept it?
Yeah, and chances are they're going to ask the expert. In my case, it was me that they would ask. Because once I made it, a lot of times they didn't even know they owned the risk. So it's an education because they always have managers, security managers in my particular breed of people that you just accept the risk on behalf of other people. That's the wrong answer. So I always start out by having those dialogues with those owners and saying, this is your risk. In our case, it was Julie. All right, and so I would talk to Julie about, you own this responsibility. It is your responsibility. It's my responsibility to you to help you come up with a plan to mitigate and manage or eliminate that risk. And so that's what a PM needs to be pushing for too. It might be just something as simple as timelines, right? That these projects have to get done in a timely manner. But if the PM can see right from the beginning, and generally they know that this is not going to work out well, right? You have a gut level, and with your level of experience from PM, you can look at a project and say, it can't be done this way. And it's just not going to, this is not going to happen this way because you're going to see something in there like, wait a second, the fire marshal needs to come and approve this. And, to get on their schedule takes X, you haven't factored that in. That's where the experience of the PM over the project really has to come in as a partner.
And that's an interesting point that you bring up, because I always say PMs are subject matter experts in the field of project management. And if in this example, I'm managing building a whole new sprinkler fire security system, there are so many intangible things that I don't know to do unless they're on my project plan. And that's where you rely on those SMEs to know, hey, we need to get inspected before we do this. It's why I always say construction is its own breed of an animal of project management. It shouldn't even be called project management.
Yeah, yeah, it is you're running a tightrope circus for sure. Because you have two different groups here. It's not just the customer that PM needs to have a relationship with. They need to have a relationship with the trades that they're working with. Because to your point, Trevor, you're not the SME on electrical, and so this is one of those things you should set your expectations with those people that you're managing. I'm responsible for us to check off this list of things. I'm the project manager, but you're the electrician, you're the plumber, you're the engineer, you're whatever. You're the SME. You need to look at these plans, number one, and tell me yours will work. And oh, by the way, what part of this project are you relying on somebody else? And to have you two talked, right? Because
And
that's where that communication, both upwards into your customers' organizations and outward to your field operations that are actually going to deliver on this project. A lot of times they don't talk, and then that's a real problem.
I think that's a great point to wrap up because that circles us all the way back to who owns these risks. If we don't get inspected on time, whether it's construction, whether it's security, whatever it is, the risk of the inspection relies on somebody on the team to know that needs to be done. The risk of passing that inspection probably falls on someone on the executive team as a stakeholder because it's their job to make sure that the team was complete and ready to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so this is where a good project manager will allow people to have a voice and not just show up and do their work and forget and leave, right? They need to be coordinated. There's not a single trade that doesn't rely on some other trade to do their job.
Yeah. Now we move into the hand selected guest question for you.
And selected, okay.
Hand selected based off of my knowledge of your personality.
This would be good.
Would you rather only be able to communicate through interpretive dance or only be able to whisper?
I'm going to have to go with interpreted dance.
Really?
Yes. And the reason why is that I was down at the VA office and I have to get hearing aids. So I won't be able to communicate at all if we're whispering.
Well, I didn't say everyone else had to whisper. I just said you.
I know. But no, interpretive dance. This is like the question, would I rather fight a 1,000-pound duck or 1,000 pound ducks?
No, I thought mine was way better because at least it's realistic.
Yes, sir.
And then, since we have a few more minutes, I'll ask you another one. Would you rather reply all to a company-wide email with a very embarrassing personal secret or get cut on the Jumbotron at a major sporting event picking your nose?
I think I'm going to go with picking your nose. At least I can deny it was me. It wasn't my email address. And so the email address is going to be, it's me. I'm responsible. And if it wasn't me, then I allowed somebody to hack my system.
You don't need the legal jeopardy of somebody knowing your personal secret?
Yeah, I don't really have too many secrets that people don't, as
No,
you
I
will.
just meant legal getting involved because you told something.
Yeah, well, that's happened. But
It happens to all of us at some point, right? We all have to have that conversation with the legal team and nod our heads and go, yes, I understand.
we
It won't
won't do it
happen
again.
again.
Yeah. So,
And hopefully it's just the verbal warning, no written.
but
Not
yep,
that I would know anything about this personally.
But to mitigate the risk on the last question, I've done two things because I worry about the jumbotron and everything and hitting. One, I no longer have a company-wide email, so that was one way to mitigate the risk. And number two, I never go to any facility that has a jumbotron. So I thought about the risk, I owned the risk, and I have eliminated the risk.
And there's also one really easy way to mitigate and eliminate that risk of the reply all problem of you don't reply all to emails because not everybody needs to know what you're sending.
Yeah, I've received a number of those emails, but
Yes.
I've never been responsible for sending one though.
Yeah. I recently actually just sent an email to the wrong person because I misread the email address.
So
Luckily, it wasn't anything personal. It was just me trying to buy something.
live and learn.
What are you going to do? What's the worst that can happen, right?
Yes, you have to fight a 1,000-pound duck.
No, I don't want to do either one.
You're airborne, man. You can do it.
So, so with that being said, do you have anything that you want to promote to our audience or let them know about, or where they can find you or anything else?
Well, I'm actually no. If anybody wants to find me, ask you. Um, because I'm trying to mitigate my risk for replying all. So, and to me is, the one thing given the state of the world today is just being kind to each other. So,
And you want to enjoy retirement.
I really am enjoying retirement. I should have retired a long time ago. This is nice. So,
I seem to recall you telling me for about 3 years I'll retire when I stop having fun, and I'm still having fun.
well, I'm still having fun. I wasn't me that retired. The PE firm retired us.
Yeah, that is true. But, I look back at a lot of that stuff and I say things happen for a reason at some point, and I move on to bigger and better things.
That's absolutely right. I've been through a lot, as you mentioned earlier, and including cancer and things like that. And I wouldn't change a single thing. And if you change one thing in your life, you don't know what that changes, and you wouldn't be where you're at today.
That whole butterfly effect.
That's right. So I'm like, I'm going to change the thing. So
Yep. And we in the military are notorious for, well, if I'd made this different move, and then you map out a whole different alternative reality, and then and then you walk up to them and say, well, what happens if you didn't pass that school, or you didn't get into that unit? And you just watch their brains break because their whole plan that they had alternate reality universe is no longer valid because all of their assumptions are challenged.
yeah, that's where you got to be flexible, right? What did Mike Tyson say about a plan?
Everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face. And I used to always say, I used to always quote, I don't remember who said it first, but no plan survives first contact.
Yeah, and that's very true, right? But the thing is about that, the basis of that context for that saying is that whatever that was, right? So whatever your plan was, you trained for it, you equipped for it, you got the right people for it. So that even going back to the PM's role, right? If you'd done all that work and then it started south on you, you should have had the flexibility because you have the right teams on the right people and the right resources to adapt. And that's where,
That's
the U.S. military is very successful.
Well, that's why we always briefed the PACE plan, primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. You always had a backup to the backup to the backup, and then if the fourth backup failed, you're in a world of hurt already that you don't even know if you're gonna survive. And that's a metaphorical thing, not a literal thing, because when projects go south, they go south quick, and if you can't recover, you just get stuck in the quicksand of you're never getting out of this horrible, horrible, never-ending disaster.
So absolutely, man.
So I think that's a great spot to end. So mail your deliver mail it. Let's like and subscribe. Keep interacting with the show pages. Mail your deliverables be on time, your budget's in the black, and your scope not creeping. For Ed Bacco, I'm still Trevor, and I'm still the disgruntled PM.